remember seeing one of your articles about how to greenwash like a pro. So I thought actually it'd be quite fun, because I don't know, Will, if you've read this article, but it's amazing. So let me read out a little bit. I actually brought it up in the meeting.
Well, you have to preface it by saying,
satire, obviously, yeah. It's satirical.
This is the first satire I've written in 40 some years.
Well, hello and welcome to the stream, an unscripted, unedited, free-flowing conversation featuring guests who reject the status quo with a bias for action in the world of water and beyond. My name's Tom Freyberg. I'm an environmental journalist and content creator specializing in water.
And I'm Will Sarney, a water strategy consultant and investor doing my part to solve wicked water problems.
And we are thrilled to be joined by Joel Makower, the chairman and co-founder of GreenBiz Group. Joel, great to see you, and thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, Tom. And Will, it's always great to see you.
We look forward to the chat.
Very good. Well, Joel, I know it's the kind of the morning after the kind of the Thanksgiving break there, so appreciate you sort of tuning in. And we've got lots we want to sort of speak with you about today, but just kind of doing a quick search. One of the first things that came up was that you're the guru of green business practices. Right.
Yeah.
That's one hell of a title. I think that was from the Associated Press, right? But
yeah, the Associated Press called me that back in the 20th century, back in the 90s. And it still shows up in my bio. And, when the Associated Press calls you anything that's not, bad, you got to kind of run with it.
You've got to take the compliment and keep it, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely, yeah. But I think then in terms of like, because you've done so much and I actually watched your introduction to your recent GreenBiz event, which was fantastic, by the way, where you did the different voices and you're like from optimism to pessimism, and kind of kudos on doing that. But let's kind of go back in terms of your 30, 40 years in sustainability. Where did it all start, and how did you sort of actually co-found GreenBiz Group to kind of put your mark in the sand, if you will?
Wow. And we have like 2.5 hours, right?
We need the condensed version. Yeah.
We have all weekend, Joel.
Yeah. Right.
Let's just keep it rolling, right? Yeah.
Okay. Buckle up, folks. We're in for the long haul. I'm like you, Tom, I'm a journalist by training, and I studied journalism because I didn't really have a clue what I wanted to be if I grew up. And my hypothesis back at the time, this was in the 70s, was that under the guise of sticking my nose in other people's business, I'd find something that I was good at and interested in and synced with my values and lifestyle and all of that. And for the first 15 years, what it turns out what I was good at and synced with all those things was sticking my nose in other people's business and writing about it. But I was interested in a couple of things. One was consumer issues. So I'm going to reveal my advanced age here, but when I was in journalism school at Berkeley, there were two things going on in the world that I found really interesting. One was Watergate, which was journalists as truth tellers. Mm-hmm. And the other was Ralph Nader, the Raiders consumer advocate, Ralph Nader, not the election spoiling one a few years later, that was really everyman as dragon slayer and truth teller and all of that. And so I was sort of interested in consumer issues, and that's where I got my start. But I really quickly realized that in order to understand consumer issues, you kind of had to understand business, and that was sort of where I went. And so I always sort of bumbled along. I was interested in a lot of things that later sort of fell into the sustainability fold. Just for example, my first book in 1981, 40 some years ago, was on the health effects of office environments, because at the time they were sealing up buildings to save energy and tearing out the walls to create the cubicle culture and bringing in all these synthetics, particle board desks and things, and running the air conditioning less. And then they introduced computers, and these were small insults that were adding up. And of course, to create, and then labor was starting to unionize office workers. There's this whole movement taking shape that was interesting to me. And of course, that later became green building and a whole bunch of other issues, wellness and things like that. So the thread keeps going back. If you really go back, the thread is at the intersection of business, technology, and society. So, you know, I wrote magazine articles about solar. It was then Hot Water Solar back again in the 70s for Washingtonian magazine. And along the way, I had an opportunity to create the US edition of a British bestseller called The Green Consumer Guide, written by, co-authored by someone who I'm sure you know, and Tom and you as well, Will, called John Elkington. And I created the US edition, which was published in the run up to Earth Day 90, which was a massive media event where, you know, Planet Earth was on the cover of every magazine. And for our younger readers, magazines are these just kind of big papery blogs.
That was a public service
you can still
announcement,
find them
Joel.
apparently, right?
They apparently still have some around, I guess. Yeah. And all of a sudden, I became anointed as an instant expert on green consumer issues. And we very quickly had a weekly syndicated newspaper column on consumer issues. And I was, you know, preaching the gospel of every time you open your wallet, you cast a vote for or against the environment. And the marketplace isn't a democracy. It doesn't take 51% of people voting to make a difference. This is, by the way, before I knew it didn't take 51% of people voting in a democracy, but that's another story. So
no, we'll get to that. We'll get to that.
And then I quickly realized two things. One, there was no green consumer movement in the US. I looked over my shoulder, realized I was kind of standing there by myself. And there may have been a reason that my book was called The Green Consumer. But it wasn't me necessarily. And the two, that the companies I was being asked to come in and talk to about this stuff are themselves grappling with a whole bunch of issues around energy, wastewater, and toxics and carbon and things. And so I started a monthly newsletter, 8-page, what we would now call a dead tree snail mail newsletter called the Green Business Letter. And then I'm old enough, as is Will, to say the sentence, and then the web came along and decided to, I had seen all this great information coming, and I had always considered myself a information pack rat. But all of a sudden, I'm now a content aggregator, which is so much cooler, and decided to create this website called greenbiz.com to bring all this information together. And that was sort of the beginning. And then all of a sudden, I met up with a guy called Pete May, who was a B2B publishing executive. And then we ended up really commercializing this and starting doing events. So sorry if it's a longer story to a shorter question, but the reality is that today we're now 60 people on our way to 100, based in Oakland, with doing some 4 big events, and we have the media piece, the event piece, and then we have some peer networks of sustainability executives that we convene for what we call peer-to-peer learning and what they tend to call group therapy. But that's where we are. And so all of a sudden, going back to my original story of why I became a journalist, what I was looking for, I had this moment sitting in my office. This was now maybe 15, 20 years ago, where thinking about that, maybe journalism will help me find something that I was good at and interested in and all that. And I just remember, oh man, holy crap, I found it. I'm home. And this was what I realized I was looking for. And maybe it found me, I don't really know, but somehow this was the area that, and it's just been an incredible ride because it's never changing and just always fascinating. And we can talk more about that.
Joel, thanks for the journey. And part of what I would love to hear, and you and I have talked about this before, where are we at with all of this? I mean, you were there at the dawn of it. I mean, really. And I love how you frame it. It's like, 2 steps forward, 1 step back in a lot of ways. And what are we getting right? And what are we not getting right? And are we stuck in a rabbit hole on certain issues and so on? So to me, that journey, this is more than an origin story. This is someone who has chronicled the beginning and is still very, very engaged in dialogue around, again, what are we getting right and what are we not getting right? And, is there reason to believe we can solve these wicked problems and so on? So, as we just continue the conversation, for me, that's absolutely invaluable to hear.
Yeah. I mean, Tom referenced this video that I did to open our GreenBiz 22 event back in February, and it really expressed the duality of being in sustainability. And it had me, two me's, one in color, one in black and white, the good, happy me and the not so happy me. And the happy me was saying, this is the most exciting moment of my sustainability career. And then the other me saying, this is the most frightening, terrifying moment of my sustainability career. And then on and on, a whole bunch of those pairings. I finally have the team I've always looked for, I've always wanted, but all my best people keep getting hired away. Anyway, so that's the reality. And we live in this duality where, there's this incredibly exciting, energizing, inspiring action taking place in the corporate world. And every month there's something new and different and exciting and impactful. But it's just not going at the scale, scope, and speed that we need to take on the big challenges, climate and water and everything else, and let alone the social issues about equity and just work and everything else. And so that's the duality, is that it's good news, bad news. And that's sort of always been the theme. We're doing amazing stuff, but it's just not good enough. So, as a journalist, as a commentator, as an analyst in this field, it's always, excuse me, it's always a struggle of how positive or negative do we want to be in any given moment? How much do we cheer them on or beat them up? And that's a sort of this tension, creative tension that I face every day.
I like how you kind of call it the duality, and you mentioned in the same speech about this internal kind of monologue radio that people hear. In 1 minute, it's okay, there's more investment being unlocked, we have some of the solutions to climate change. At the same time, you hear about these horrendous mega events like the flooding in Pakistan quite recently, right? And the impacts of climate change right now on our society. And you referenced a kind of quote where it's almost like you need that relentless, determination just to keep going and ride that out. And Will, we talk about the role of stubborn optimists, right?
And unreasonable people.
And unreasonable people are quite powerful in this movement that we now need, right?
Yeah, I what you're referring to is something that I incorporated into that little 10-minute talk that I gave, which is something called the Stockdale paradox, and it refers to James Stockdale, who was, among other things, the highest ranking U.S. prisoner of war in Vietnam, kept there for 7 years, tortured. All his men were there, and finally got out. Years later, he was interviewed by Jim Collins, the famous author of Good to Great and other things, and Collins asked him, "Well, how'd you do it?" And he talked about it, but he said something that you must never confuse faith that you will prevail in the end, which you can never afford to lose, with the discipline to confront the brutal facts of your current reality, whatever they may be. And that's really sort of captures what we need to be, is how do we keep our eye on the prize, recognizing the brutal facts of the current reality, and not letting that take us off course or discourage us, because that's how Stockdale said he survived. Collins asked him, well, who didn't fare as well, and he said, well, the optimist said, we'll be out by Easter, we'll be out by Christmas, we'll be out by next Easter, and some of them kind of died of a broken heart, according to his telling. And so balancing that optimism and that current reality is a really, really hard thing to do. And it's really easy to just be Pollyannish and say, there's so much going on, business is changing the world, look at the amount of solar and electric vehicles and wind and everything else, and look at the water technologies that are coming in, that the climate tech and all these amazing things that are happening, and they are. But as you know, as well as I, all the indicators are just heading in the wrong direction, and we're just not getting it done. And so that's the duality, that's the creative tension.
Yeah, Stockdale is a great example. You're absolutely right. And that was a good reminder. Joel, it strikes me that, to your earlier point, we're not doing enough fast enough, and the fast enough is the piece here. And I find that we tend to applaud our, progress, even if they're small things, without really looking at how do we move away from pilots? How do we really do things at scale? And certainly the public sector is the slowest of the stakeholder groups in terms of movement. The multinationals are much faster, and there are bits and pieces of multinationals doing things fast at scale, but it's frustrating. It's still not enough. I mean, it's good that we applaud our progress and acknowledge that.
Yeah.
But my take is that there is some complacency here that we're doing great things, and in fact, we're not.
Yeah.
In place. And Tom and I talk about this all the time. It's like, how do you drive that bias for action? Period. Action, action, action.
Yeah, no, you're right. As usual, Will. We spend a lot of time collectively celebrating incrementalism. And
right,
that's
right.
a good thing. That's a good thing, but that's sort of the main mode is what I call radical incrementalism, or random acts of greenness, which are sometimes a lot of things. The company's doing some facility things and product things and employee things and philanthropy things and making some big commitments, and it may be a lot of big audacious things, but there's still kind of a series of disconnected dots, and they're not really necessarily seen in their fullness and strategically. And so, yeah, but here's the thing, and this is again part of this world we've somehow chosen to inhabit, this world of sustainability, that this is tough stuff. And some of these, what to the outside world may seem like, really, they're celebrating 10% recycled coffee cup content. Well, Starbucks has spent probably a decade trying to get recycled content into their cups, and I think they're getting there now, but it's taken a long time, and it's not for lack of desire. It's not for lack of scale, although they would say that, with all the Dixies and the Lilies and the Solos, the big cup makers, that they still are not a big enough cup buyer to move the market. In the same way that McDonald's will say, well, we only buy 1 or maybe 2% of all the ground beef, the beef out there, that we can't really drive ranching, practices. And so, but the point is that it can take years to do some of these things that companies do. And yes, they're kind of small ball, incremental kinds of things. And so how do we think about that? Again, do we cheer them on or beat them up? I maintain that activists need to learn 5-word, 2-sentence, 5 words, which is thank you, now do more. They know the now do more part, but they don't, sort of give the credit where credit is due, and acknowledging the challenges that internally and sometimes in supply chains or value chains that companies face in trying to affect the kinds of changes that we need. And so that's really, and yes, at the same time, companies celebrate incrementalism where they should be saying, that's not a big deal. You should be that should be the way you operate, and should have been the way you've operated all along. So let's not make too big of a deal of it, but we need to do a lot more and a lot more quickly. And so that again is where we find ourselves.
Yeah, Joel, Tom, let me just, if you don't mind, please. I want to pounce on Joel on this one.
Oh boy.
So I mean, and not literally, Joel.
Well.
But how, the ESG rage right now, how much of a problem is that? Because for me, as I look at it, it speaks to the incrementalism piece. It's if you confuse ESG as your sustainability strategy, then you set goals and, any progress towards those goals is celebrated as a win.
Yeah.
You think that's problematic based on what you've seen so far?
Well,
or
I'm going to invoke that old, what gets measured gets managed line, that because that's what the ESG, it's saying you need to do these things. And so let's manage towards those things. Those things really are not necessarily, they're kind of a baseline. They're kind of a minimal performance. But the bigger thing that most people don't recognize is that ESG ratings are not about impact. They're not about how well a company is doing. They're about risk, plain and simple. Risk specifically to investors or lenders. And so that's what these are about. And so, you can see some companies that I think a lot of people would say are not necessarily good actors from a sustainability perspective, big oil companies, for example, that do really well with ESG ratings because they've met those requirements. They're disclosing things. They have certain policies in place. They have certain performance objectives or targets and timetables. But that doesn't mean they're actually doing anything that we would consider, or the planet would consider, beneficial, again, at the scale, scope, and speed we need. So the ESG thing is really, challenging. At the same time, we need a level playing field. We need some common language on how we talk about this stuff, because without that, everyone's saying, well, we're saving the planet, we're green, we're committed, we're this, that, and the other thing. And reality was like, well, prove it.
Right.
And proving it requires some numbers and, comparing comparability, standardization, and verifiability, and all those kinds of things. And, we need some standards for that. And that's what the ESG standards and ratings are all about. But again, a highly rated ESG company may still be polluting, emitting, wasting, and doing other things that are just not the right thing to be doing right now in 2022, 23.
Right.
I think the kind of the devil is in the detail, right? Within the actual rating. And a big part of what you do is on communication. And you mentioned there about kind of having a level playing field. And I remember seeing one of your articles about how to greenwash like a pro. So I thought actually it'd be quite fun, because I don't know, Will, if you've read this article, but it's amazing. So let me read out a little bit. I actually brought it up for the meeting.
Well, you have to preface it by saying,
satire, obviously, yeah, it's satirical.
This is the first satire I've written in 40 some years. And then I'll get to the other part after you've sort of teased it out a little bit.
Absolutely. So it's a satirical take, giving advice, but we don't have time to go through everything. But I think the first one is make bold commitments. Announcing a goal for 2030 is low-hanging fruit and kind of soon. So why not go for the brass ring? 2050. No one will be around. No one will be around to remember what you said way back in the early 20s. The main thing is you've made a bold, courageous commitment you can talk about far and wide for years to come. I mean, we'll make sure this is included in the show notes. I think it's brilliantly written, Joel.
And Tom, there is a pledge that has 2050, and I'm not going to name names, but I bring that up all the time, and I've said to clients, "Hey, look, I'm not going to be around. You're going to be around. Like, who cares?"
Right.
It falls into the who cares category. So anyway, I'm glad you teed that one up.
Yeah. So this piece, which again, satire, has 12 tips on how to greenwash like a pro. Because I didn't break voice in this article, I sort of maintain this, here's how to do it. What's not in there, and what I think is important, is that all 12 of those things are legitimate strategies. It's just that the way they're typically done is, suboptimal, at least, if not misleading, or in many cases just plain silly. And I think that was the point I was trying to make. That and one of my colleagues who read the article in advance, Dylan Siegler, said something to the effect of, "This is going to piss people off in the best way." And sure enough, people said, "Wow, this was, I really wanted to share this, but it's so painful that I'm really not sure that I want to, because it exposes us to some of the things that we did that, we've done, 6 of these 12 things. And it's like, yeah, I get it.
Hey, Joel, you are punk by our definition with that. So you
Okay.
are now officially branded a water punk.
All right.
because
I've been
of
called
that.
a punk. I'm not sure that's the same as punk, but
You're
I'll go
punk.
with that, I guess.
This is great. This is what people need pushback. They need a
Yeah.
mirror. This is what you're doing. This is how it sounds. So
Yeah, I mean,
very
people
cool.
want, there's truth to power. There's, and that's kind of what I've set out to do in my role at GreenBiz Group. I don't have any operational role these days. There's 60 employees, not one of whom reports to me. So I get to be out there and writing and looking around corners to see what's coming next. And I think part of my role is to reflect back to our community, the GreenBiz readership and various communities that we've assembled and convened. What they're doing and how it's looking and how to think about it. And so I do that. And I think that's, kind of important. At least people tell me that they appreciate it, even though it may piss them off from time to time. But it's really easy, and this is true in any field, but it's really easy in this field to just get, in your little tunnel vision, in your little bubble, with your sustainability colleagues and friends and geek out on these, on really important stuff, parts per million, biological oxygen demand, and, pounds of waste and everything else, and lose track of the big picture. And in the same way we're talking about with ESG, they got you've got in some ways, fiddling while the planet's burning. And I think the big picture is really important to keep in mind. And also, we are under attack, we in sustainability these days, and which is something that frankly I didn't see coming a few years ago, because it seems, we're doing God's work here. We're trying to save the planet and rally people and elevate people, and particularly those at the lower ends of the economic spectrum. And to get the pushback of woke and all that, at least here in the States, is challenging. And so, and keeping perspective on that, is that really a thing? Should we be worried about that, or do we just plow ahead, eye on the prize, nose to the grindstone, whatever aphorism you want to use it? And that's another challenging thing that I think people in sustainability faces, the pushback that we're getting on many corners, and even on ESG. ESG is a scam. ESG is a marketing thing. It's not really. There's just so much pushback right now that it's really important, I think, to keep things in perspective. So that's part of what I try to do.
I didn't see this ESG woke thing coming either. I mean, for me, that is a new tool that is being used to push back on, a couple of decades of, green and sustainability. So, there's always been that pushback that there's no value in it. It's bull, but now it's been weaponized in a very different way. That's really, I would say concerning. And we need to be careful about that scaling to some point where it really becomes a barrier.
Yeah, I mean, it's concerning to some point, but so much of it is just performative. It's theatrics. And I think, one way to counter it is just to own it. In other words, saying, if caring about the future of the planet and trying to make, bring clean air and drinkable water to everybody, including those who don't currently have it, is woke, count me in. If elevating those who in the community level who are doing good work and in their communities around sustainability, whether it's in community gardens or energy efficiency for poorer households or whatever is woke, I'm all in. If ensuring that we have the energy that we need and for in the future, and it's not coming from air choking, planet warming sources, is woke. That's me. So I think I don't think we should run away from that. I think we should just own it and saying, okay, if that's what you want to call me woke, then I guess that's the name. But I'm not going to apologize for anything that I'm doing here because it's, I think it's for the greater good.
Yeah, I love that.
I think wokeism generally has a connotation of kind of tied with almost a cancel culture, right? But as you mentioned, if it's tied to long-term improvement of the planet and solving some of our environmental challenges, then by all means own it. So I think we may have even found the title for the podcast here. Will, what do you think?
I was just to say, Joel, we can de-weaponize it by owning it and saying, I'm woke. I believe in these things. I'm working. This is what I'm doing. I'm committed to ensuring these things. Then you're saying you're weaponizing it. It becomes a critique that doesn't really carry much weight. And so I think that's an opportunity that we're not yet grasping.
Joel, you touched on something that I think is important, and maybe teasing out a little bit about, this is not about saving the planet. It is, creating a healthy environment. And it goes back to your origin story about unhealthy buildings that emerged. It's, we now have an unhealthy planet and we're living in the fishbowl. So how could that be wrong to work on improving public health, the health of your children, the health of your communities? So I don't know. I agree with you. And I think maybe there's a fine tuning in the narrative in terms of, how we frame some of this stuff.
Well, and a lot of this, and this is what all three of us do in some form or another, is storytelling. And we're not that good at it yet. Not us. We're perfect at it. We're great, but of course, no. But as a rule, we're not very good. Companies really, I think this is a technical term used in comms department, suck at most corporate communications. And it's so important because when we look at what we're talking about here with sustainability, on the one hand, it's incredibly nerdy, geeky, technical stuff that even some of the experts are debate, but it's also very much about our bodies and our health and our communities and our world and everything that we care about and our future and our kids. It's head and heart. And as you can go way too far in one direction and talk about all the technical, facts and all that stuff. And people say, I don't know, that just, I don't understand that, whatever. Or you go too far in the other direction with the hard stuff and it becomes so California woo-woo. And I say that as a proud native Californian. And so storytelling is how we mix and integrate head and heart. And it's how we communicate, the best way we as a species know how to communicate ideas. So the question is, how do we do that better? And how do we tell the stories that become the irresistible future that we all want to have? And again, companies, so we're convening at our GreenBiz event in Phoenix in Scottsdale, Arizona in February. We're having a comms summit where we're bringing together 200 people on both with three different parts of the ecosystem: corporate sustainability, corporate communications, and legal, or what I call the Bermuda Triangle of sustainability messaging.
Oh God.
Where messages go in and they're never to be seen again, at least not in that form. And that, I think companies, they need to understand, how do you do that? And how do you, and then the other side of the coin is the G word, greenwash, which has now become so ubiquitous. I mean, in Europe, it has legal implications. In the US, it's still just an epithet that anybody can throw at anybody that they don't understand, where they don't understand or believe that it's the right thing to do. And so that's the thing that scares companies. How do you talk about what you're doing? And this goes back to, are we celebrating incrementalism? Well, maybe we shouldn't, but how do we talk about this good work that we've done, that we're proud of, that we think is moving the needle, that we think is a leadership thing? It's a big challenge that companies generally don't do very well. And so I think that's also a big opportunity.
Yeah, radical transparency or transparency is tough, very tough. I'm always fascinated when the sustainability function reports into legal. For me, that is just the kiss of death. Absolutely. You know, I don't know how professionals function with that. And nothing against attorneys, but you know,
it depends on the company. I mean, in some companies that's
Yeah.
fine. In some companies it becomes, you know, you can't even walk in my office without, you know, 5 people vetting what you're wearing. You know, it's such
Right.
it becomes such a constraint that it you know, it's no wonder why sustainability messages never really get out.
Right.
The storytelling element of this, Joel, was really, and I think you sort of hit the nail on the head, that actually sometimes I think from a company point of view, without stereotyping, we people get so caught up in the what, the actual, the functionality of their solution, the actual, whether it's the flux of the membrane or the parts per million. But if I can use the analogy of the water pollution story at the moment in the UK with the combined sewer overflows, which has really hit the press, and now a lot of water companies are under increased pressure. We've spoken about this, that people don't tend to really care about parts per million. They care about, is my local water swimmable? Is it even drinkable? Is it safe for my kids to go to the beach at the weekend?
Yeah.
At the moment, when there's been sewage spills, and there's a lot of really sort of aggressive campaign groups like Surfers Against Sewage that have done some amazing work on this. Like, we need to go back to what are we, like the essence of communicating is trying to get people to emotionally kind of connect with the story, right? So we need to get away from the what and more towards the why. And I think there's a huge need for change on that.
Yeah, it's what's relevant to them. I mean, why should they care? You know, at a very personal level. Yeah, I mean, that's the opportunity.
Yeah.
You know, you and I have talked about rowers and getting them to care about the quality of the water, not just that there's a body of water, but no, you really should not flip your boat because you're going to get sick. You know, like they would care about that. So
yeah, no, I mean, Tom, you're 100% right. Is it what's interesting and important here is not the what of sustainability, it's the so what. It's like it's what does this mean? How does this affect me? Is this, you know, is this a significant thing, or is it just another little incremental thing? And we're not good at putting that into perspective. You know, back in the dawn of the .com era in the late 90s and 2000s, there was this maxim in the tech world that content is king. And you may recall that content is king, and you know, those who have content are going to rule the internet. And it turns out that content is pretty cheap and ubiquitous. And unless you're Disney or a number of others that, you know, own this amazing stuff, National Geographic,
right,
the FT, you know, content is, as I said, cheap and ubiquitous. What's king really is context, the being able to make sense of this. And if you look at you know, the big websites, whether it's Amazon or Google or Spotify, they bring context. They make sense of all this information out there. I mean, that was Google's, I think, first mission statement was to organize the world's information.
right.
And so the context in sustainability is as critical, perhaps more critical than the content, the what. And again, we need, I think companies in particular need to explain better or tell better stories, more to the point, of what is this? How does this fit in? I get choked up thinking about this. Sorry. What's the significance of what you just said you've accomplished or committed to? And you know, and I don't think companies even know in some cases, and so they don't take the time to find out or really put it in perspective.
that's well put.
I think that's really well said. Yeah, context is absolutely king. So Joel, when you look at kind of, you mentioned there the GreenBiz Group, 60 employees, you have the kind of the media, the event side, your work in speaking and authoring. What's the kind of, how do you sort of see the next chapter?
For me personally, or for the company, or for the planet?
Well,
what scale are we talking about?
I think for I mean, you're the guest, right? For Joel Makower, what's your next next kind of phase after you mentioned, you now have this kind of quite amazing position of stepping away from the business and being able to look around the corner, but actually for you yourself, like, yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna paraphrase my friend John Elkington, who, as I said before, sort of indirectly got me into this space. So I turned 70 this year, or earlier this year. John, who lives on your side of the pond, Tom, is 72 or 3, I can't remember. And John has this great line that I'm embracing and borrowing or stealing, whatever. He said that I believe that the next 10 years of my career are going to be the most exciting and impactful. And I think that's true. I mean, I'm not, going to retire. People say you're going to retire. And I say, well, let me think. If I retired, I'd probably write, speak, travel, advise startups and mentor young people.
Everything
That's a lot of what I get to do every day now. And so, except I have a title and a salary and a team and a great, amazing team. And I get to, to be in the front of the room a lot of the time with this topic as a result of that. And so I think this is, first of all, I'm not sure this is, you were probably asking substantively and topically but I think this is really an exciting time. And going back to my video from earlier this year, it's an exciting and terrifying moment. But leading into the excitement, I think is because there's, the indicators it's not going well, right? We're not heading in the right direction or going fast enough at all. We can still stem a lot of the problems, not all of them, but we're in for a world of hurt. The question is, how bad will that hurt be? And so I think there's a lot that we can do to not only minimize the hurt, but actually improve lives and move the needle on a lot of the planetary challenges that we have, including water. And so that's I'm all in. That's what I'm going to be doing. I love this work. I love the community that I get to consort with on this. And as I said earlier, every 6 months there's some new topics that just fascinating me, and I just want to lean into and try to explain or provide context and the so what to our readers in the GreenBiz community. So I'm not going anywhere.
You're right about the community, good people doing good things. And how could you abandon that, let go of it? I mean, I've got a friend who, when I first met her 20 years ago and told her what I did, she said, "Oh, you're living in the solution." And I said, yeah, I guess that's true. I never thought of that. So It's a good place to be.
Yeah, well, you're a water guy, Will, and so you're swimming in solutions, and so I think that's how I would frame it. But what do I know?
That is well put, Joel.
So, Joel, to kind of round things off, something we like to ask every guest this season, anyway, as a final sort of concluding point, is if you had the ability to go back in time and speak to your 17-year-old self, what would be the one piece of advice you would give a 17-year-old Joel Makower?
Cut your hair, dude. No. I mean, that's an amazing question, and I'm not sure I have an amazing answer. I mean, I think it would be is lean into your curiosity. Don't stop asking questions. And don't stop questioning answers, and don't take things at face value, but dig a little bit deeper. When I was in journalism school, I remember writing a feature article for a magazine writing class, and one of the comments from the professor was, "Don't be cavalier about the facts." Don't be, in other words, don't be afraid to, first of all, dig into the facts and then to say what they are, whether they support whatever you're writing or not. And so I would counsel myself to just ask questions, be suspicious, be curious, be excited, and never lack that curiosity.
I love
that. That's amazing. Yes. essentially stay curious, never stop asking questions, and also, keep asking why. I think that's continually important.
Yeah, there's that why is really important. There's just something about, asking why like 4, 6, or 8 times, and
Right.
well, why, just digging deeper to really get to the nugget, the end of something. And not a lot of people will say, get out of here. I'm not gonna. Yeah, I told you why. I'm not going to go any deeper. But that is the goal, to understand the why as much as the what.
Mm-hmm.
I remember going on a journalist tour in Ireland to a company that was recycling electronics. And I remember the CEO said to me, "You've got to stop asking questions." And I took that as a compliment. I was just very curious at the time about how things worked. And he almost told me this annoying young journalist who was questioning, well, why this and why that? And why did you do that? Yeah. So I actually thought, okay, that's a bit of a kickback, but maybe that's a sign that I was doing my job right at the time, reporting on what was going on. So I absolutely love it. Keep asking why, stay curious. And Joel, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks for joining the stream, and continue the great work you're doing over at GreenBiz. Thank you both. It's a pleasure, and same to you. Keep at it. So much to do, so little time, but it's an exciting and terrifying time. So let's embrace that. It's so much fun to talk about this stuff, even though, don't always have the answers that people want to hear about. What do we do? How do we do it? Right. And, it's not so simple, as you well know. Absolutely. Great stuff. All right. Well, appreciate your time. Thank you, Joel. We will officially stop the recording there. Okay.